Okay, welcome everyone to this deep dive.
Hello. Yeah, today we're looking at a really compelling source, one that directly challenges, well, the history of science most of us probably learned.
It really does. It puts forward a pretty strong claim, arguing that, core parts of our modern science, especially maths, algorithms, they're built on a legacy that wasn't just missed, but maybe actively hidden.
That's the core of it. We're digging into an article called The Silenced Equation, Reclaiming Turkic Scientific Heritage.
Right.
And its whole mission really is to unpack these claims about intellectual theft and the erasure of Turkic contributions.
And to think about what that means for the history we thought we knew and, well, just how important naming things and giving credit really is in the world of knowledge.
Exactly. So this deep dive is all about understanding the article's specific arguments.
Okay, let's get into it then. The article doesn't pull any punches right from the start. It calls this the scientific crime of the century.
Yeah, strong words. How the West expropriated Turkic knowledge and erased the true authors of human advancement. That's the subtitle, setting the tone.
So first, it sort of lays out the traditional story, right? The one we usually hear.
hmm It outlines that common narrative. Math basically from the Greeks, algebra from Arabs, zero from India, computers from the British, like Turing. It paints this picture of knowledge flowing mainly from these sort of established, often European or European-defined sources.
But then the article just flips that script immediately.
Completely. It argues the real foundations for math, for thinking in algorithms, theoretical models. Even the early scientific method didn't spring up primarily in Europe.
Where then?
It points to a Turkic scientific civilization,
Yeah.
places like Khwarazm, Bukhara, Samarkand, Fergana. That's where it argues the groundwork was really laid.
And crucially, the article insists this isn't just like a simple mistake in the history book.
No, it calls it systemic.
Hmm.
Systemic intellectual theft and a deliberate erasure.
Okay, so let's talk specifics. The article uses this idea of the silenced equation.
Right, the quadratic formula. X plus bx plus c is a0. Most of us learned it in school, how to solve it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Barely. Well, the article's point is this. Everyone learns the how, but almost nobody learns the who. Meaning it's just presented as the quadratic equation. It's anonymous, like it just appeared out of thin air, a kind of timeless truth.
And the article contrasts that with,
With how we usually treat major Western scientific discoveries. Think Newton's laws, Pythagoras' theorem, Einstein's relativity, the Turing machine.
right, they're always linked to a name.
Exactly. The name is fused with the discovery. It cements their legacy. But the quadratic equation, anonymous.
So who does the article say should be linked to it?
Al-Khwarizmi. The source argues he was the first to really systematize this equation, and in doing so, laid down the bedrock for algebra and, importantly, algorithmic logic.
And that name, Khwarizmi.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar somehow.
It should. The article points out the word algorithm itself comes directly from his name, or rather its Latinized form, algorithmi.
Wow, okay, that's the direct link.
It is, and that's what the article finds so striking. You have this clear linguistic tie, yet Al-Khwarizmi himself, largely unknown to the public.
And his origin.
His region, Khwarazm, often just a footnote, if mentioned at all in science history, and his identity, which the article specifically identifies as Turkic, it argues, is either erased or kind of blurred, while the concept, the algorithm, lives on, but detached, anonymous.
So the article's interpretation is that this isn't just forgetfulness, it's a strategy.
An intellectual power strategy, yeah. That's the term it uses.
How would that work?
Well, the argument goes like this. Naming controls the narrative. Deciding who gets authorship shapes collective memory. And erasing the originators, well, that helps dominate how we even think about where knowledge comes from, epistemology.
So controlling the name controls the story,
Basically, keep the useful stuff, the knowledge, the tool.
but hide the creator. Cut it
And-
off from its roots.
Exactly. Disconnect it from its history, its culture.
Does he give other examples of this beyond Al-Khwarizmi?
It does. It talks about other major Turkic scholars figures like Ibn Sina, al-Farghani, al-Biruni.
Okay.
And the article claims that Western history often lumps them together, maybe as Arab scientists or generally Islamic thinkers.
And the problem with that, according to the source,
It argues that classification is often just wrong, factually and culturally. It says it acts to systematically anonymize their specific Turkic identity and ignore the unique intellectual environment, the Turkic milieu, where they actually worked.
that definitely makes you think about labels and how they shape our understanding of, well, who did what and where.
It really does. And, the source doesn't just leave this in the past,
It brings it up to today.
right into the present, which makes sense when you think about algorithms.
Yeah, they're everywhere now. Your YouTube feed, TikTok, ads.
Credit scores, maybe even medical decisions. These algorithmic systems are just fundamental to modern life.
Man, the article's connecting this back to
To Al-Khwarizmi. The point is, despite algorithms running everything, you're almost never taught that the core logic traces back to this scholar from ancient Khwarazm.
it makes a comparison, doesn't it?
A very pointed one. It suggests, if Al-Khwarizmi had been, say, working in Cambridge, he'd be a household name, celebrated.
But because he wasn't.
Because he was, as the article puts it, a Turkic scientist from the Muslim world, he's effectively buried under the sand of abstract terminology and colonial categorization. That's a direct quote.
That's strong language.
Yeah.
And this leads to the claim that this pattern, it's still happening.
Yes. The article argues this isn't just ancient history, it's an ongoing issue. It presents a contemporary case study.
Okay, well,
A researcher named Dr. Mamujan Kuchkarov. The article identifies him as a contemporary Turkic researcher, and it discusses his theory of human language called Odom Tili, or OT theory.
Odom Tili theory. What's the core idea, according to the article?
Well, the source describes it as pretty radical, but based on observation. It proposes language didn't start with abstract symbols or structures.
But with
Sounds. Primal sound responses tied directly to physical sensations and emotions.
like a sound for pain, or the feeling of water.
Exactly, or the hiss of a snake, physical touch, things like that. These basic phones, the article explains, are rooted in action and sensation, not abstract thought initially.
And this forms the basis of language.
The evolutionary basis, yes. And the source makes a further claim that these foundational sounds are, in their structure, inherently Turkic.
Inherently Turkic. How so?
It uses an analogy. Just like the decimal system probably came from having 10 fingers, this theory suggests phonetic meaning comes from our physical selves, our biological responses, which the theory apparently links to Turkic phonetic patterns.
Okay, that's a very different take on language origins. What does the article say about how this theory has been received, specifically by Western academia?
According to the source, silence, rejection, marginalization.
Just dismissed. Why does the article claim that happened?
The article argues it's because accepting the OT theory would fundamentally challenge, even unravel the foundations of Western linguistic theory, citing figures like Saussure and Chomsky.
So it's seen as too disruptive.
Yes. The source claims the theory is inconvenient because it points to the root of language being in Turkic biology and physics, not the kind of Greek logical framework the article suggests dominates Western linguistics.
That's a pretty big accusation about academic motives. Does the article offer specific evidence for why it thinks the rejection is due to bias rather than, say, disagreements over the scientific merits or methodology?
The article seems to present the lack of serious engagement itself as part of the evidence, fitting the pattern it described earlier.
Okay.
It makes another strong comparison here. It basically says, if Dr. Kuchkarov wasn't Turkic, if he had the right institutional backing, his work would probably be in top journals like Nature or Science.
It's just universities would be studying it.
Yeah, MIT, Harvard, there'd be TED Talks, Google Scholar citations would be flooding in. That's the picture it paints.
But because he is a Turkic scholar, working outside that perceived mainstream.
The source claims his work gets sidelined, not necessarily because it lacks merit, but because, in the article's view, it disrupts the colonial hierarchy of knowledge. It argues his identity and the theory's implications are just threatening too much.
So the article really ties it all together at the end.
It does, in an epilogue called The Right to Name, the Right to Exist. It circles back, stressing this isn't about nationalism,
But about
intellectual justice. It repeats those earlier comparisons. If Newton and his apple deserve a name and a story,
then Khwarazmi and his equation deserve one too.
precisely. If Einstein gets credit for ideas that, yes, built on earlier physics, sometimes from the Islamic world.
Then those earlier contributors also deserve recognition by name.
Right. The article concludes that the history of knowledge, as it's often presented, has been, in its words, curated, censored, and cleansed to fit an imperial narrative.
And it ends with that really striking line.
Yeah. The most dangerous lie in science is not a falsified result, but a true discovery without a name. Makes you stop and think.
It really does. It pushes you, the listener, to consider how naming works, who gets credit, and maybe question the narratives we've accepted about where knowledge actually comes from.
And the article finishes with a call to action, framed as a scholarly duty, to re-archive knowledge properly, reconnect truths to their real origins, and basically remember the forgotten.
And for anyone listening who wants to follow up on that specific contemporary example,
Yeah, the article provides the details for the Odam Tuli Academy and Dr. Mamajan Kuchkarov. It points to their YouTube channel. I can put that link in the description. It's youtube.com at Mamajan Kuchkarov 3469.
okay, definitely a lot to mull over there about the stories behind science, the power of naming, and whose contributions get remembered and whose don't.